My brother gave up his youth to raise me while our mom failed us. We survived things together that no one should ever have to go through, and even so, I betrayed him on the one day he truly needed me. There are people who grow up and, when they talk about their childhood, they say things like, I miss those times, or it was the best stage of my life. I will never be able to say that. And I don't say it looking for pity, I say it because it is simply the truth, and because this story makes no sense if you don't understand where my brother and I come from. My name is Sophia. I am 23 years old. And the most important person in my life is someone I failed in a way that I still don't know if I'll ever be able to fully forgive myself for. His name is Rodrigo. He is 30. And although on paper we are siblings, there was a time when he was without exaggeration the only reason I stayed here. But to understand what happened between us, I need to tell you how it all began. I need to tell you about our mom. Our mom's name is Elena. And Elena is one of those people who are hard to completely hate because somewhere, beneath all the damage, there is someone who genuinely believes she did the best she could. The problem is that the best she could wasn't enough. It never was. And Rodrigo and I carry the consequences of that in ways neither of us asked for. Rodrigo didn't grow up with me from the start. His dad and my mom separated when he was very young, and his dad took him. I am the daughter of another man, someone who didn't stay either. So for years, Rodrigo and I existed in the same world but in completely separate orbits, knowing nothing of each other beyond a name. That changed when Rodrigo was 12. His dad, for reasons I never fully understood and that aren't mine to judge, decided he could no longer take care of him, and he sent him to our mom. I was 5 years old when Rodrigo arrived at our house. I don't remember the exact moment he appeared, but I do remember the feeling. It was as if suddenly there was someone in the apartment who filled the space in a different way. Not loud, not annoying, just present. As if something had always been missing and suddenly it was there. What I do remember with great clarity is what our home was like back then. Our mom was, at that time, in one of the worst periods of her life. She was deeply depressed, though no one used that word. They just said she was doing poorly. She drank every day. Not discreetly, not a glass of wine before bed. She drank until she couldn't speak properly. She drank until her words tangled, her eyes glazed over, and anything you said could become the trigger for a massive fight. And besides that, she was hooked on a man. A guy named Marco, the husband she had been in a relationship with for years, a relationship that from the outside was clearly doing no one any good, but from the inside, to her, was the only thing that mattered in the world. Marco would arrive whenever he wanted. Sometimes at 11 at night, sometimes at 2 in the morning. He brought bottles. They fought. They screamed things at each other that I listened to from my room with a pillow over my head, trying to block out the sound. And Rodrigo, who had only been with us for a few weeks, heard everything too. There were no rules in that house. No schedules. No one to check if we had eaten, or if we had done our homework, or if we had slept well. School was something that happened or didn't happen depending on whether someone remembered to wake us up, and often, no one remembered. Rodrigo was 12 and I was 5, and we both fended for ourselves in the middle of a chaos that no child should have to navigate. But here is the thing. From the very beginning, Rodrigo saw me. Not as a burden. Not as a problem. He saw me as his sister. And that, in that moment, was something I didn't know I needed so much until I had it. When you are 5 and your older brother is 12, he is basically an adult to you. He is huge. He knows things. He can open the refrigerator without help, he can turn on the stove, he can read the instructions on the cereal box. Rodrigo became that for me. Not because anyone told him he had to. No one asked him. He just did it because of who he was, because he had that thing inside him that wouldn't allow him to ignore that his 5-year-old sister was there, alone, hungry, with no one watching over her. He made me breakfast before going to school. He helped me with my homework when he himself had just come home from school exhausted. He told me stories before bed when our mom and Marco fought so loud that I couldn't close my eyes. And he also taught me to do other things. Things he shouldn't have had to teach such a young girl, but were necessary there. He taught me to distinguish when our mom was in a state where it was better not to talk to her. Not out of fear that she would hit us, but because when she was very drunk, any conversation could end badly. Crying. With her saying things to Rodrigo that no 12-year-old should ever hear about themselves. And Rodrigo just absorbed them. He let them in and said nothing. Or sometimes he would take my hand, lead me to another room, put music on his old phone, and we would pretend nothing was happening. We also learned to hide. Not literally, though sometimes yes. But to become invisible when the situation required it. To not make noise when Marco was there. Not to ask for things when our mom had that face that said it wasn't a good time. But there were also good moments. And that's what makes it all harder to tell, because if it had been pure horror, maybe it would be easier to process. But no. There were afternoons when Rodrigo and I would escape to the park a few blocks away and spend hours there. He would push me on the swing. He taught me how to skateboard, even though I was terrible and fell every 3 seconds, and he would laugh, not in a cruel way, but in that way that makes you laugh too, even as you're getting up with a scraped knee. We talked. A lot. About kid things, about things we liked, about what we wanted to be when we grew up. Rodrigo wanted to be an engineer. He liked cars, understanding how things worked. I didn't know what I wanted, but I liked to draw, and he always said my drawings were good, even though objectively they were pretty bad. Those moments are the ones I guard most carefully, because they are the proof that what we had was real, not just survival. It was siblinghood. It was genuinely loving each other. And then it started getting worse. Rodrigo started getting into trouble. Not because he was a bad person, but because when you are 13 or 14 years old and no one in your house sets limits, or asks how you are, or notices if you come or go, you end up looking for that belonging elsewhere. And elsewhere isn't always the best place. He started skipping school. First a day here, then 2 there. Our mom didn't notice, or if she did nothing. Rodrigo started hanging out with people older than him, people who had their own complicated stories. There was trouble with the police. Things I didn't understand well at the time because I was so small, but I saw it in the faces of the adults when they talked about him. And what finally broke everything was when Rodrigo's school truancy reached a level that could no longer be ignored. The authorities got involved. And in the end, somehow, our mom ended up in jail for neglect. I was 7. Rodrigo was 14. And suddenly, we both had nothing beneath our feet. When our mom went to jail, things moved fast in ways I didn't understand. Adults made decisions, moved us from one place to another, and talked about us as if we weren't in the room. Rodrigo was kicked out of the house shortly after our mom got out. I don't know exactly what happened. I don't have all the details. I only know that one morning Rodrigo was gone, and someone explained to me that he had gone to live with our grandmother, who lived in another state, hours away. I was 8 years old and my brother was gone. I'm not going to exaggerate by telling you the world ended, because I'm an adult now and I can see things more clearly. But at that moment, for that 8-year-old girl, it did feel that way. Like someone had turned off a light you didn't know was there until everything suddenly went dark. Our mom got out of jail, but things didn't get better all at once. People imagine that those kinds of experiences transform people, that they come out different. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. Our mom came out more or less the same, still carrying the same problems, still stuck in the same patterns. And then, less than a year after Rodrigo went to live with our grandmother, our mom became homeless. I was 9. And that was when Rodrigo, who was 19, who was studying and working as a firefighter at the same time, who was barely building something for himself, decided he was going to take charge of me. No one forced him. No one put papers in front of him and told him to sign. He made that decision. He came to get me. And he took me to live with him. To this day, when I think about it, I don't fully understand the magnitude of what he did. He was 19. He was practically a child still. He had his own wounds, his own traumas from growing up in that home, his own unprocessed things. And yet, he said yes. The apartment where Rodrigo and I lived was small. I won't romanticize it by telling you it was cozy or that it had charm. It was small, and sometimes it was cold, and the water heater only worked when it wanted to, but it was ours. Rodrigo worked long shifts as a firefighter. He would come home exhausted, with the kind of tiredness that gets into your bones, and yet he would sit with me to ask how school went. He still checked that there was food. He was still there. And I, who was 12 and carrying things no 12-year-old should carry, tried to help however I could. I cooked my own meals most of the time. I learned to do basic things because I didn't want to be a burden to him, and when I could, I cooked for him too. We had a strange dynamic. It wasn't father and daughter. It wasn't exactly siblings in the conventional sense. It was something in between. Something that has no name, but felt like a team. Like two people who had survived the same shipwreck and decided to row together toward wherever there was land. But I was carrying very heavy things inside. Thoughts that back then I didn't know how to name, but that now, with more years and more therapy, I recognize as severe depression and suicidal ideation. There were days when I simply didn't want to be here. I didn't say it. I didn't tell Rodrigo, I didn't tell anyone. I carried it alone and smiled when necessary and went to my room and closed the door. Rodrigo noticed. Not always, not everything, but he noticed when something wasn't right. He would ask me. And I would say I was fine because I didn't want to worry him, because he already did enough, because I felt that being an emotional burden on top of everything else was too much to ask. And then something came that changed everything. We had a roommate. Someone who rented in the same apartment to help with expenses. I won't give many details because honestly, I don't want to go into it more than necessary, but that roommate was hurting me. Physically. And I knew it and said nothing because I knew that without that extra money we couldn't pay for the apartment, and if we didn't pay for the apartment, Rodrigo and I would be homeless. So I stayed quiet. 4 months. Carrying that too. Until I couldn't anymore. There was an incident. One serious enough that it could no longer be hidden. Rodrigo saw it. Or he found out. I don't remember exactly how, I only remember his face when he knew. It wasn't exactly rage, though there was rage. It was something deeper. It was the pain of someone who realizes they failed to protect the person they most wanted to protect, even though technically they hadn't done anything wrong. I remember he was crying. Rodrigo, who was the strongest person I knew, was crying, and I didn't know what to do with that because I had never seen him like that. A few days after that incident, Rodrigo told me we were going on a trip. He told me he wanted me to see our grandmother, that he was going to take me there. And I didn't ask too many questions because I was exhausted and because I trusted him blindly. We drove for hours. I remember the journey in fragments. The highway. The music he played on the radio. The silence that sometimes settled between us, which wasn't uncomfortable but tired. Like two people who have run a long way and need to stop to breathe. When we arrived at our grandmother's house, Rodrigo sat me down and spoke to me. He told me he loved me very much. He told me he had been thinking a lot about what had happened and that he wasn't in a position to give me what I needed. That he himself was going through very difficult things that he didn't fully explain to me, and that he needed me to be in a safe place with someone who could truly take care of me. I was 13, and I understood. That is what weighs on me most when I think about it now. That I understood. I didn't start crying or begging him to stay or telling him it was unfair. I simply understood, because I had grown up in an environment where you learn not to ask for too much, where you learn to accept things as they come because making a scene only makes them worse. I hugged him, and he left. And I didn't see him again for a long time. The time after that is blurry in a way. I lived with my grandmother. School. Trying to be a normal teenager when inside I carried things that weren't normal. From Rodrigo, news came indirectly. Through other people. And it was almost never good news. I found out he had started using methamphetamine. That word, when I first heard it in relation to him, did something strange inside me. It wasn't exactly shock. It was almost as if some part of me had known something like this could happen, that someone who had carried so much without asking for help was at some point going to find something that turned off the noise. The times I saw him were sporadic. Family parties that ended strangely. Visits that didn't last long. Moments when I could clearly see he wasn't okay, that there was something extinguished in his eyes that wasn't there before, and yet he would smile and ask how school was and act as if everything were fine. I went along with it. Because what else could I do? There were times when the time we spent together was in situations that weren't the safest. People around him I didn't know. Places that made me uncomfortable. And I went anyway because he was my brother, and every time I thought, maybe this time he's better, maybe this time it's different. It was almost never different. And it reached a point where we simply stopped talking. There was no big fight, no dramatic moment of rupture. Just the silence that slowly settles in when two people are in very different places and can't find the bridge to cross to the other side. I reached a point where I accepted, with all the pain that implied, that maybe I wasn't going to get my brother back. That maybe the person who pushed me on the swing, who taught me how to skateboard, who stayed awake telling stories when our mom fought with Marco, maybe that person no longer existed in the same way. And I kept living. Because that's what you do. While Rodrigo was losing himself, our mom was doing something I didn't expect either. She changed. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic way. But slowly, like those plants that grow so slowly you don't notice until one day you look and there is something there that wasn't before. She stopped drinking. I don't know exactly when or how, but she quit. She enrolled in college. She finished her degree. She got a stable job. She made a life for herself. She was still dramatic. She still had her quirks. She still carried complicated feelings about Marco that sometimes came out in ways that frustrated me, but she was fundamentally a different person. She was a person who had picked herself up, and she supported me. She helped me financially while I studied. She was present in ways she had never been before. She was late, yes, but she had arrived. That created something complicated in me. Because the love you feel for a mother doesn't disappear just because that mother failed you. It just gets complicated. It becomes something that has no easy name, something that carries resentment and affection, disappointment and gratitude all at once, mixed together in a way you don't quite know how to process. She was the one who was there. Every day. Rodrigo was lost somewhere I couldn't reach. And then, when I had already learned to live with that reality, Rodrigo changed too. I found out indirectly, like almost everything with him. Someone in the family mentioned that Rodrigo had gotten clean, that he had left drugs behind, that he was rebuilding his life. I didn't fully believe it at first. Not because I didn't want to, but because I had hoped so many times and so many times it hadn't been true, that my defense system simply wouldn't allow me to get my hopes up too quickly. But months passed and the stories were still good. That he had a stable job. That he was doing well. That he had met someone. And then, a few months ago, I found out he was getting married. He didn't tell me himself. I found out through another person in the family. That hurt. It hurt in a specific, sharp way, because it wasn't just the fact that my brother was getting married. It was what it signified. That he had rebuilt his life enough to take that step, that there was someone who loved him and whom he loved, that he had reached a point of stability that I had come to think might never exist for him, and that all of it had happened without me being part of it. I called him. I told him it hurt not to have heard it from his own mouth. He asked for forgiveness. He said he had been busy, that everything had happened fast. I accepted the apology because I genuinely wanted to accept it. I wanted to believe that we could find a way to be something to each other again. He invited me to the wedding, and I said yes. The wedding was in another state, almost a 20-hour drive. I didn't know his fiancée well. Her name was Valeria. They hadn't been dating very long in the grand scheme of things, and even though it wasn't a long time, I wanted to support my brother. I wanted to be there. I felt that somehow this wedding was also an opportunity, not just to celebrate him, but to start repairing something between us, to be present in his life in a way I hadn't been able to be in a long time. My mom was going too, and my step-siblings. It was, or at least it was supposed to be, a sort of family reunion around something good, around something to celebrate. We left. We started driving. 15 hours after leaving, when we were just a few hours from the destination, my mom received a message, and everything collapsed. What happened was this. My mom, at some point before the trip, had sent a message to Valeria, Rodrigo's fiancée, asking for details about the wedding schedule. The tone of the message, according to Valeria, sounded as if she weren't taking the event seriously, as if it were something my mom was doing dismissively, without giving it the importance it deserved. My mom insisted that wasn't her intention, that she was just asking because she wanted to organize herself well. Valeria didn't believe her. Or maybe she believed her about the intention but couldn't let it go. Things escalated. Words were exchanged. And in the end, Valeria told my mom not to come to the wedding. She uninvited her. My mom, when she was uninvited, didn't apologize. She said she didn't feel she had done anything wrong. She said that if her message had been misinterpreted, that wasn't her responsibility. And that was it. My mom wasn't going. My step-siblings, whose relationship with Rodrigo exists mainly through my mom, decided not to go either. And I was left alone in that car, 5 hours from the destination, having to decide what to do. It wasn't an easy decision. And I don't want to present it as if it were, because I would be lying. On one side was Rodrigo, my brother. The person who had taken care of me when no one else did. The person whose fingerprints are on parts of me that I don't know how to describe with words. That 12-year-old boy who made me breakfast and told me stories so I wouldn't hear the fights. On the other side was the reality of the situation. That I hardly knew Valeria. That I hardly knew any of the guests on that side. That my brother's family in that context was basically unknown to me too because we had been separated for so long. That arriving there alone, without my mom, without my step-siblings, in the middle of a family tension that already existed, was going to be uncomfortable in a way that I honestly didn't know if I could handle. And there was also the fact that my mom had paid for the trip, the hotel, everything. And although I know that shouldn't have been the deciding factor, when you are in that moment when you are physically exhausted from 15 hours on the road and emotionally from everything that is happening, those things carry weight. I felt trapped between two people I loved. I felt as if there were no right decision, only two versions of being wrong in different ways. And in the end, I decided not to go. I turned around. I went back. Rodrigo told me he forgave me. He told me he understood I was in a difficult position, that it wasn't fair what they had put on me to carry, that he didn't hold a grudge, and I believed him. And at the same time, I felt that something between us had settled in a way that wasn't going to be easy to lift. Since then, there is a silence between Rodrigo and me that wasn't there before. It's not the silence of anger. It's something more like awkwardness. As if we both knew something happened and neither of us quite knew how to talk about it. Recently he called me crying. He had spoken with our mom. He had asked her to apologize to Valeria, who by then was already pregnant. And our mom had refused. She told him she couldn't apologize for something she didn't feel she had done wrong. She told him that if anyone had to apologize it was Valeria, for having uninvited her and making her miss her own son's wedding. And Rodrigo called crying. And I listened. And I didn't know what to say to him because I understood both things at the same time, and that is a very lonely place to be. I understand Rodrigo. I understand why it hurts him that his mother isn't capable of taking that step. Our mom has always had difficulty taking responsibility for things. The closest she gets is saying she did the best she could, that she wasn't perfect. And sometimes that is enough and sometimes it isn't. But I also understand my mom. Not justifying what she did, but understanding where she comes from. Understanding that she also carries things, that she also has her own story, that growth isn't always linear. And also though it costs me more to admit I have complicated feelings about Valeria, because it was she who made the decision to uninvite my mom, not Rodrigo. And she did it when we were already halfway there. And although I understand she felt my mom's message was a lack of respect, I also wonder if there was another way to have handled it. If there was something in the middle between putting up with it and uninviting her. I don't know. I don't have that answer. What I do know is that I continue to carry that weight. That guilt of having turned around. Of not having been there. Of having failed someone who didn't fail me when it mattered. Rodrigo and I still talk. Not like before, but we still talk. Sometimes he sends me photos of the baby when she was born. She is precious. She has his eyes. And when I see her in those photos, I think that life is a very strange and very big thing, that it can contain at the same time so much pain and so much love and so much that you don't end up understanding. I wonder if one day we are going to have a real conversation about all this. About the childhood we shared. About the years that were lost. About the wedding I didn't go to. About all the moments in which we didn't know how to find each other even though we wanted to. Maybe so. Maybe not. What I know is that I love him. With all the complication and the guilt and the distance and the lost years. I love him in that way that isn't learned, that simply exists because he was the first one who saw you when no one else was looking. And I suppose I have to keep carrying that. Not as a punishment, but as the price of having loved someone in a world that didn't always give us the conditions to love each other well. If you made it this far, thank you for reading. I didn't expect to write so much, but it feels a little less heavy now that it's out. And if anyone else carries something similar, something that doesn't have an easy name, something that doesn't fit into a single emotion, I just want to tell you that you are not alone. That sometimes the hardest stories to tell are exactly the ones that most need to come out.